For decades, Jeff Chandler was remembered as the silver-haired, broad-shouldered heartthrob of 1950s Hollywood. He was a leading man with a commanding presence, a booming voice, and a chiseled jawline that made studio executives swoon. Chandler was the kind of actor who embodied classic masculinity on screen, from playing Cochise in Broken Arrow to romancing some of the biggest starlets of the era. But in 1999, nearly 4 decades after his untimely death, his image was jolted by a claim that no one saw coming. And it came from someone who had known him intimately, Olympic swimmer turned actress Esther Williams. In her explosive autobiography, Williams made a jaw-dropping statement. She described walking into a room and discovering something so unexpected about Jeff Chandler. She claimed it ended their affair on the spot. What she alleged was that Chandler enjoyed dressing in women's clothing, a revelation that stunned readers and sparked a frenzy of speculation. The line was casually buried in a passage about their relationship, but its implications tore through Chandler's once pristine legacy like wildfire. Why would she say this? Why now, decades after his death, when he couldn't respond or defend himself? The entertainment world was divided. Some shrugged it off as a Hollywood eccentricity, something that wouldn't shock a modern audience. But others felt it was an intentional smear, a betrayal of trust, or even worse, a lie for publicity. After all, Chandler wasn't alive to speak for himself. What really happened behind the closed doors of that star-studded relationship remained a mystery, until this buried detail reignited interest in both stars. Almost overnight, people weren't talking about Jeff Chandler's powerful performances anymore. They were talking about the Esther Williams confession. Suddenly, Chandler's masculinity, once one of his most defining traits, was under question. Even more confusing was the total lack of similar stories from anyone else during Chandler's life. His close friends, colleagues, and even ex-partners were quick to leap to his defense, calling the claim outrageous, cruel, and utterly out of character. Still, the damage was done. The seed had been planted. Fans who grew up watching Chandler in black and white matinees were left reeling, wondering if they ever really knew the man behind the camera. Was it true? Or was it a case of an old flame twisting the past for shock value? That's where things get murky. Because once you start digging into the story behind the feud, the affair, and the final betrayal, it becomes clear there was far more going on beneath the surface than anyone realized. And that so-called confession? It was only the beginning. Long before any memoirs or shocking revelations hit the shelves, Jeff Chandler and Esther Williams shared something far more intimate than tabloid gossip. A romance that Hollywood insiders whispered about but never openly confirmed. Their connection reportedly began on the set of Raw Wind in Eden, a 1956 film where they played opposite each other in a steamy tropical thriller. On screen, the chemistry was undeniable. Off-screen, things moved fast. According to Williams, what started as flirtation quickly turned into a full-blown affair. At the time, Chandler was one of the most sought-after leading men in Hollywood, and Williams was already a household name, famous for her elaborate, synchronized swimming spectacles and girl-next-door image. Together, they made a striking pair, two stars at the height of their fame, navigating careers, egos, and the constant scrutiny of the studio system. But what the public didn't see was the volatility bubbling beneath the surface. Their affair, though brief, was intense, passionate, and according to Williams, deeply personal. She would later describe Chandler as charming, sensitive, and emotionally complex. But behind that suave exterior, she also hinted at a darker side, one filled with insecurities and private habits that didn't align with his public persona. That's where the alleged discovery came in. According to Williams' memoir, everything fell apart when she came across something in Chandler's private space that changed how she saw him. That discovery, her claim about his cross-dressing, wouldn't come to light until decades later. But even at the time, the breakup was abrupt, and tellingly, neither star ever publicly acknowledged the relationship while Chandler was alive. That silence spoke volumes. Friends noticed a sudden tension between them, and Williams quietly distanced herself from Chandler both professionally and personally. Some who were close to the pair suspected a bad breakup. Others thought the romance had simply fizzled. But in hindsight, the fallout was far more complicated. Chandler reportedly never spoke about Williams again, and she, too, avoided the subject until that fateful autobiography reopened the wound nearly 40 years later. The sudden end of their relationship sparked confusion in Hollywood circles, but the press never dug too deep. Chandler, ever the gentleman in interviews, kept his private life guarded. Williams, tightly managed by MGM, maintained her squeaky clean image. For the time being, the feud stayed buried, an unfinished chapter never meant to see the light of day. But Esther's later confession would change everything. With just a few words in her book, she transformed what had once been a private falling out into one of old Hollywood's most bizarre posthumous scandals. Whether intentional or not, she reopened a feud Chandler had taken to his grave. And without him there to respond, the narrative was hers to shape. Still, questions remained. Why would Williams dredge up something so deeply personal decades later? And more importantly, was there anyone left who could, or would, dispute her version of events? As it turns out, the answer was yes, and they weren't about to stay quiet. When Esther Williams released her 1999 autobiography, The $1 Million Mermaid, fans expected a glamorous retrospective on her golden days in Hollywood, behind-the-scenes stories, studio politics, maybe a few romantic anecdotes. What they didn't expect was a bombshell so explosive. It rewrote an entire man's legacy. Tucked between tales of movie stardom and pool choreography was a single claim that would send shockwaves through old Hollywood. Jeff Chandler, she wrote, enjoyed dressing in women's clothing. The statement was casual, almost offhand, as if it were just another quirky detail in a long list of celebrity oddities. But the reaction was anything but casual. Within days, newspapers and gossip columns latched onto the claim like sharks smelling blood. The idea that Chandler, one of cinema's most masculine icons, could have secretly enjoyed something so out of sync with his public persona was pure gold for tabloids. Headlines shouted betrayal. The internet, still in its early days, lit up with debates. Was it true? Was she exaggerating? And most importantly, why say it at all? Williams didn't elaborate. She left the story hanging, giving readers no context, no follow-up, just a line implying that what she discovered ended their romance instantly. That lack of detail gave the allegation even more mystique. People started speculating wildly. Was it a one-time thing? A lifestyle? A misunderstood joke? No one knew for sure. And Jeff Chandler, dead since 1961, couldn't answer any of it. Hollywood veterans were stunned, not just at the content, but at the timing. Chandler had been gone for nearly 40 years. He couldn't confirm or deny anything. He couldn't defend himself. And many believed he wouldn't have had to if his friends had anything to say about it. Jane Russell, Chandler's co-star and longtime friend, was one of the first to fire back. She called the allegation nasty and flatly denied ever hearing such a thing. Jeff was all man, she said. This is just unconscionable. Another friend, actress Marsha Hunt, echoed the sentiment. I never heard even a whisper of anything like that. To them, it wasn't just gossip. It was character assassination. So, why did Williams go public with the story after all that time? Some speculated it was a power move, a way to generate buzz and sell books. Others saw it as a moment of honesty, however ill-timed, from a woman who had nothing left to lose. Still, the backlash was swift and sharp. People questioned her motives, her credibility, and whether it was fair to drop such a revelation when the subject couldn't respond. Whether true or not, the claim cast a long shadow over Chandler's legacy. It transformed the conversation around him, shifting attention from his work and talent to one salacious rumor. And for many fans, that stung more than the story itself. But if Williams thought her confession would go unchallenged, she was wrong. Because in the wake of her memoir, a powerful wave of voices began rising to Jeff Chandler's defense. And they weren't pulling any punches. As the press and public dissected Esther Williams' shocking claim, one thing became clear. Hollywood wasn't going to let Jeff Chandler's name be dragged without a fight. In the weeks following the release of her memoir, some of the most respected figures from the golden age of film came out of the shadows. Not to question Williams herself, but to defend the man they knew, and what they said painted a completely different picture. The loudest voice belonged to Jane Russell, Chandler's co-star in multiple films and a personal friend. Known for her straight-talking attitude and no-nonsense persona, Russell wasted no time calling out what she saw as a betrayal. That story was just nasty, she told reporters. Jeff was all man. He was a dear friend and a wonderful guy. I never heard anything like that about him, and I don't believe it. For Russell, the accusation didn't just clash with what she knew about Chandler. It felt like a direct attack on someone who could no longer speak for himself. Marsha Hunt, another legendary actress of the era, echoed Russell's sentiments with equal conviction. I never heard even a whisper, she said in an interview. It was completely out of character for Jeff. He was a man's man, gracious and kind. Everyone respected him. For these women, this wasn't about defending outdated notions of masculinity. It was about loyalty, integrity, and preserving the dignity of a man they believed had been wronged. And they weren't alone. Directors, crew members, and even a few of Chandler's former romantic partners stepped forward quietly, offering private support or giving off-the-record comments to reporters that contradicted Williams' claim. While none denied that Chandler was a complex man with his own private struggles, not one recalled anything even remotely resembling the behavior described in the book. What struck many observers was the unity of the defense. This wasn't a case of one or two people dismissing a claim. It was a broad, emotional pushback from an entire generation of people who had worked with Chandler and respected him deeply. To them, Esther Williams' statement wasn't just gossip. It was character assassination by Memoir, a one-sided story told without the courtesy of response. Even film historians and biographers found themselves treading lightly. Chandler had no documented history of gender nonconformity, no whisper campaigns in Hollywood's rumor mills, no scandalous police reports or studio cover-ups. Nothing. His romantic relationships, though private, were with women. His public image, though carefully cultivated, matched the stories told by his friends. And yet, the accusation lingered. Because in the public eye, a single line in a best-selling book can outweigh years of quiet, respectable legacy. Still, the people who knew Jeff Chandler best weren't backing down. To them, this wasn't just about clearing a friend's name. It was about setting the record straight for future generations. But why would Esther Williams risk so much backlash so many decades later? The answer, some believe, lies in timing, legacy, and a motive far more calculated than anyone expected. For years, Jeff Chandler's reputation hung in limbo, caught between the respectful silence of old Hollywood and the single, explosive claim in Esther Williams' memoir. Most of Chandler's contemporaries had either passed on or chosen not to reopen old wounds. But then, decades later, a friend, someone who had known Chandler intimately, both on and off set, finally spoke out. His name was Richard Anderson, a fellow actor best known for The $6 Million Man and a regular fixture in Hollywood's mid-century scene. In a rare interview conducted not long before his death, Anderson broke the silence. When asked directly about Esther Williams' allegation, he paused. Then, with the weight of memory behind his voice, he said, "Jeff was complicated, but that story, that wasn't him." Anderson didn't offer a denial soaked in outrage. Instead, he gave something much more powerful: context. He spoke of the tremendous pressure Chandler faced as one of the few actors who took a stand on racial and political issues during a time when staying quiet was safer. He recalled how Chandler had risked his own popularity by advocating for civil rights and desegregation in Hollywood, a move that cost him roles and angered studio executives. Chandler, he said, was braver than people gave him credit for. As for the claim itself, Anderson was diplomatic but firm. "We all have private sides, things we don't share with the world," he said. But Jeff wasn't hiding a secret like that. He was hiding his exhaustion. He was tired. Tired of playing the same roles. Tired of carrying an image that didn't always fit who he really was. But dressing up? No, that wasn't his truth. His words struck a chord, not because they refused to claim outright, but because they humanized Chandler in a way no one else had. Instead of focusing on salacious gossip, Anderson spoke of a man burdened by expectations, crushed by the relentless machine of studio-era fame, a man who didn't have the luxury to break character, not even when the cameras stopped rolling. The interview, which surfaced years after it was recorded, reignited interest in Chandler's life and legacy. Fans revisited his films, not to find clues, but to rediscover the actor through a new lens, one of empathy. The narrative began to shift. No longer just a man accused, Chandler was seen as a symbol of how Hollywood demanded perfection and punished vulnerability. Anderson's statement didn't erase Esther Williams' words, but it finally added balance. For the first time, the world heard from someone who wasn't defending an image, but defending a friend. And that made all the difference. It also raised a question far more powerful than any rumor could. What does it say about an industry and a culture that a man like Jeff Chandler had to carry so much, yet could say so little? The answer lies in the way the story ends. Because even after all the noise, the silence, and speculation, there's one final truth that still resonates. In the end, the feud between Esther Williams and Jeff Chandler became about more than just two Hollywood stars. It became a reflection of how legacies are shaped, shattered, and sometimes reassembled to the lens of time. What began as a single line in a memoir snowballed into one of the most polarizing posthumous scandals in classic film history, one that continues to stir debate even decades later. For some, Williams' revelation was a long overdue moment of truth, a glimpse into the private struggles behind the glossy surfaces of old Hollywood. If Chandler had indeed been wrestling with a hidden identity, they argued, it only made him more human and more courageous for surviving within a system that demanded perfection. To them, Williams wasn't trying to hurt him. She was exposing how little room the industry gave for vulnerability, complexity, or personal truth. But for others, the accusation felt like a betrayal. Jeff Chandler wasn't alive to confirm, deny, or explain. He couldn't add nuance or context to a claim that instantly rewrote public perception of who he was. And unlike rumors that float in tabloids and fade, this one came with the weight of a published book, a permanent mark on his legacy, unchallenged for years. To critics, that wasn't bravery. It was an unfair ambush. What's most revealing, though, is how public opinion shifted over time, not towards scandal, but towards sympathy. As more people learned about Chandler's battles with studio pressure, burnout, and personal sacrifice, the narrative started to evolve. He was no longer just the guy Esther Williams outed. He was a symbol of how the entertainment industry of the 1950s pushed its stars to maintain impossible illusions, often at the cost of their mental health and personal lives. Even Williams, in later interviews, seemed to regret how her story had been received. She claimed she never intended it to be a big thing, that it was just a passing detail in a broader account of her life. But when the media latched onto that one explosive sentence, the damage was done. She didn't apologize, but she never expanded on the story again either. And maybe that's the most telling part of all, because when the lights fade and the curtain falls, what remains isn't the scandal, it's the silence. The silence of a man who never got to tell his side. The silence of an industry that once demanded it. And the silence of those who watched, unsure what to believe, and unwilling to say the quiet part out loud. Jeff Chandler's story is still being written, not by headlines, but by history. And in the eyes of those who truly knew him, he remains more than a rumor. He was professional, a pioneer, and above all, a man caught between who he was and who the world expected him to be. Why did Esther Williams choose to break decades of silence and drop such a heavy allegation in her memoir, especially when Jeff Chandler had been dead for nearly 40 years? It's a question that continues to puzzle both fans and Hollywood insiders. Was it a moment of honesty? A calculated move? Or something more personal, buried deep in her own need for closure? Let's start with the context. By 1999, Esther Williams was in her late 70s. Her film career had long since faded, and she transitioned into business, pool design, and occasional appearances celebrating the golden age of Hollywood. Her memoir, The $1 Million Mermaid, was billed as a no-holds-barred tell-all, a trend gaining popularity in the late 90s, when former stars were encouraged to spill for book sales. The more shocking the content, the better the coverage. And that's exactly what Williams delivered. But there's more to the timing than just publicity. At that point in her life, Williams was reflecting on the chaos, control, and compromises of being a woman in the studio system. She'd been packaged, polished, and pushed through MGM like a marketable product. Perhaps, for the first time in her life, she felt free to speak the raw truth, or at least her version of it. The Chandler anecdote may have felt like a long overdue act of liberation from years of silence and shame, both personal and professional. Some insiders, however, weren't buying it. Critics pointed to the calculated nature of the memoir's release. It came during a cultural moment when the public was fascinated with secrets from Hollywood's past, affairs, scandals, hidden lives. The bigger the bombshell, the more attention the book would get. Dropping Chandler's name in such a shocking context wasn't just unexpected. It was publicity gold. And it worked. Her memoir made headlines and reintroduced her name to a new generation, but at a cost. Then there's the element of legacy. Jeff Chandler had been gone for decades. He left behind no tell-all, no diary, no interviews hinting at any secret lifestyle. Williams may have felt she was offering the full story, but with him unable to respond, it created a power imbalance. Whether intentional or not, she now controlled the narrative. Her words became the final word. And that, some argue, was the real controversy, not whether the claim was true, but whether it was fair to make it at all. To others, though, the motive may have been simpler: revenge, emotional revenge. If Williams had truly felt betrayed or hurt by Chandler, the anecdote could have been her final act of reclaiming power in a relationship where she felt misled or blindsided. Was it petty? Maybe, but it was human. Still, the question remains, was it worth it? The backlash was fierce. The sympathy was divided. And instead of reclaiming her own story, many felt she had rewritten his without consent. But before the dust could even settle, a deeper, darker layer began to emerge. One that hinted this feud wasn't just about secrets. It may have been about survival, image, and an era desperate to bury what it didn't understand. To understand the true weight of Esther Williams' claim and the tidal wave it triggered, you have to look beyond the individuals and into the world they lived in. The golden age of Hollywood wasn't just about glitz and glamour. It was a carefully manufactured illusion. Every smile, romance, and scandal was tightly managed by studio executives who viewed actors as property, not people. Image was everything, and deviation from that image, career suicide. Jeff Chandler was a perfect example of that system at work. He was molded into the ideal 1950s leading man. Tall, square-jawed, deep-voiced, and unmistakably masculine. Universal Studios pushed him hard as a symbol of strength and nobility, casting him in heroic roles like Cochise in Broken Arrow, and countless war films that highlighted a supposed real-life ruggedness. But what many forget is that Chandler's persona was just that, a persona. In reality, he was thoughtful, quiet, and, according to some, far more emotionally sensitive than his on-screen characters let on. The idea that he may have had private habits or traits that didn't align with that public image wasn't just inconvenient. It was dangerous. In an era where conformity was king, any hint of gender nonconformity, queerness, or emotional complexity in a male star could be instantly weaponized. Studios often went to extreme lengths to squash even a rumor. Some stars were forced into sham marriages. Others disappeared from the spotlight entirely. And those who dared to live authentically paid a heavy price, which makes Esther Williams' claim all the more explosive. If true, it wasn't just a personal anecdote. It was a direct challenge to the image Chandler spent his life protecting. And if false, it was a dagger to the heart of a legacy built under unimaginable pressure. People often ask, why would Chandler hide something like that? But the real question is, how could he not? The studio system thrived on secrets. Behind the scenes, there were whispered affairs, addictions, abortions, and yes, gender and identity stories that never made the front page. Executives held moral contracts over stars, threatening exposure at the first sign of rebellion. In that climate, silence wasn't cowardice. It was survival. So when Williams dropped her now infamous line, it wasn't just about one man and his private life. It cracked open a much larger conversation about how Hollywood erased the parts of people it didn't want the world to see. Whether intentionally or not, she forced the public to reckon with the human being behind the image. Yet some argue she did it without compassion or context. Chandler had spent his entire life avoiding scandal. He was known for his quiet professionalism, his kindness to cast and crew, and his intense desire to be taken seriously as an actor. Whether or not the claim had merit, it now stood alone, unchallenged, etched into history. And for many who admired him, that was a tragedy. But even after all this time, there was one voice missing from the story, until now. Because someone close to Chandler would finally speak out, and what they revealed would send shockwaves through Hollywood history.